Israel is able to kill this young or this giant, what are they going to do to us? And it talks about them. They fled all the way back into the cities, and Israel chased them all the way into the gates of the cities. And then they come back and they plunder what all the Philistines had left. So probably any kind of jewelry or gold, silver, any kind of weapons or armor or anything that they could take that they found as a benefit to them, they took. And Saul wants to know, who is this young boy? Bring him to me. I want to know about him. And he sees David as a benefit to him. And David is promoted into Saul's army, where he becomes a captain or a commander over the troops. And everything seems to be going well for a short time, right? And then David's popularity begins to grow. And people begin to view David as the most valiant man in Israel, and not the great king. And how does Saul respond? Becomes angry, becomes very jealous, becomes basically enraged with David. Because how can this young shepherd boy be more popular than me? Why do the people sing his praises and not my praises? I'm the king, he's not. Ever had somebody like that in our life? No matter what kind of success or recognition they got, they didn't want anybody else having success or recognition. They were felt that it was about them, and it was to be all about them. And they used their power, they used their influence to try to basically destroy this other person. In Saul's case, literally, he seeks to kill David. He's so enraged, I'll just kill him. That'll get rid of my problem. Then I will get all the attention again. And so we talked last week about Jonathan pulls his father aside into a field in chapter 19. And David has hidden into this field. David and Jonathan have come up with this plan together because of their friendship. And Jonathan has this conversation with his father and says, why are you trying to kill David? Look what he's done for you. Look what he's done for Israel. And Saul agrees, I won't kill him. I was wrong. So David comes out, they have this moment together, kind of like you would probably see in a Hallmark movie, and everything's great. Y'all laugh because it's true. And then Israel goes to war again with the Philistines, and what happens? David wins a great battle again. David is the commander that wins the battle. Ultimately, God is on their side. We understand God is the one that ultimately gives Israel the victory. But the people view David again as the reason they won the battle, not Saul. And how does Saul respond again? Becomes enraged. I'm going to kill him. And David learns that Saul is wanting to kill him again. And he tells Jonathan in chapter 20, and this is what we talked about last week, and they begin to form this plan. And what is Jonathan's response to David this time? It's like, my father's not trying to kill you. He would tell me. He tells me everything. I would know if my father wanted to kill you again. Remember, David, he just said he's not going to do it. And David is convinced, yeah, he's trying to kill me again. So David and Jonathan come up with this plan, as we talked about at the end of last week, where they were going to, David is going to hide, Jonathan is going to go to the feast that we're going to read about today. And if Saul asks where David is, and when Jonathan tells him where he is, if Saul becomes enraged, then Jonathan's going to know my father's trying to kill him. But if Saul is okay with David not being there, then they would know that David was the one who was wrong. And they also make the promise here to protect one another's families. So our reading this morning is in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 24 through 34. And then we'll skip down to verse 41 and 42 and finish the story. So
I have a question from last week.
Okay.
It's a discussion question, and it says, what can we learn from the attitude David displays when he first speaks with Jonathan? 1 Samuel 20, verse 1.
Well, 1 Samuel 20, verse 1 says, Then David fled from Naioth to Ramah, and he went to Jonathan. What have I done? What is my iniquity, and what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life? So, I think if it's just asking us what can we learn from the attitude of him, he wants an answer. Some of it, I think he's questioning whether Jonathan maybe is even aware of what his father is doing. I think if somebody had continued to try to kill me, I would want, my best friend to tell me about it. And that seems to be the relationship that Jonathan and David have with each other. And what are y'all's thoughts? What did you think?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I think it comes from contrition and confusion. Because here he is, totally his right hand. He's
Right.
made him this wonderful leader of the military for him. And then in his mind, right, he's still serving David. He's still serving Saul.
Right.
So David, in essence, goes to Jonathan, who's not only the son, and says, hey, what's going on? And I think that's what we learned, that, his is out of contrition and confusion, and yet he pursued it. And with someone within the family of Saul.
I think there definitely was, there was definitely some confusion, because remember we talked about back in chapter 19, David had overheard the conversation where Saul specifically said, I won't try to kill him anymore. And now David wins another battle. David is the commander of the army as they win another battle, and Saul immediately is trying to kill him. And you would think, if your job is to lead the military and you continue to win battles for the military, or the armies or the units you command continue to perform well and win battles in this war with the Philistines that is ongoing throughout the life of Saul, you would think the commander, or in this case the king, would be happy. But we see the exact opposite in Saul. So I think there probably is some confusion in David's mind. Why is Saul so angry with me? He's sending me into battle to lead his armies against the Philistines so that we will win. We're winning, and yet you're mad at me.
I think it's important, too, in the essence of where David turned to question. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't in the streets. He didn't say to the people, what if I done? He didn't broadcast it. He went to someone within the family,
Right.
who also was his best friend, and inquired.
No, I think that is a good point. David didn't try to turn the people against Saul to get him on his side. That is a good point. David went to, someone by themselves in hopes to get an answer. He probably did think that Jonathan would know. And Jonathan thought, if my father's trying to kill you, I would hear about it. I would know. And maybe David really thought Jonathan should know what Saul's plans are. But we find out Jonathan was not aware in this case.
But it was all because the people were so proud of David because he said he killed thousands and
his 10,000s and Saul killed his
Saul only
thousands.
killed 1,000. But you kind of wonder, why did they go to David instead of upholding their king? You know, he was king.
Well,
And he was only in the army, so that didn't mean that he didn't do it by himself.
he probably didn't, but David probably had the popularity of he slew the Philistine. When no one else in the army would go out and face the giant,
Okay.
David faced him. So he probably had some popularity on his side because of that. And then also let's think about how did David look? It says when Samuel comes to him to anoint him, he was young, he was ruddy, he was of good countenance. In other words, David is a young, strapping, good-looking guy. Okay? What is Saul at this point? Saul is probably older. He's probably showing age. And then, and some people are going to be influenced by physical appearance. And then they've also lived under Saul's rule for probably 20, 25 years at this point. Maybe even getting close to 30 years. Saul reigns for 40 years. We're told that. We're not told exactly what the time frame is in this, but I would think somewhere between 25 and 30 years they've lived under Saul's rule. Saul starts out to be a very humble, contrite king. But now we see a lot of arrogance in Saul. We see a lot of ego in him. And that probably comes out in his leadership. And, it's very hard to stay loyal to a leader, whether it's the king or whether it's your boss at work, who is very arrogant and egotistical. And we see a lot of that in Saul. So I would think it was becoming very easy for the people to praise, admire David for a lot of different reasons. Any more questions from last week? Really? All right. So if I can have my designated readers, 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 24 through 34, and then verses 41 through 42. This is the English Standard Version that's on the screen if you want to read along with it, or if you want to turn to 1 Samuel yourself, and we'll read through these verses real quick.
Then David hid in the field, and when the new moon had come, the king sat down to eat at the feast. Now the king sat on his seat at the one time on the seat by the wall, and Jonathan rose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought something had happened to him. He is unclean. Surely he is unclean. And it happened the next day, the second day of the month, and David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan's son, "Why has the son of Jesus not come to eat either yesterday or today?" So Jonathan answered Saul, "David earnestly permissioned me to go to Bethlehem." And he said, "Please let me go, for our family is having a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. And now if I have found favor in your eye, please let me get away and see my brother." Therefore he has not come to the king's table.
Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he must die." "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger, and on that second day of the month he did not eat, because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever." Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town.
All right, so we talked last week. This is the plan that David and Jonathan have put together, that as Saul holds this feast or this banquet, and David is going to be absent. He's not going to be there. And the idea is for Jonathan to see how his father reacts. David is going to be hiding outside of the city, and Jonathan is to bring the message back to David of how his father has reacted. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But so Jonathan goes to the feast on the first night, the first day, and you kind of see the way this is arranged. It seems that David is to sit at the king's table. He is to be given a place of honor. Abner is the commander or the commanding officer over all of the armies of Saul. He is sitting to one side of the king. Very prestigious, very prominent place for this man to sit. And it seems, as you look at this, there's 4 chairs or 4 seats at this table with Saul. So David is supposed to be sitting at this table also. And then the king's son Jonathan. And those are the only 4 that are to be at this table. But there's other people at this banquet. There's other places around for them to sit, for them to see what is going on at the king's table. And what are they going to notice? One of those chairs is empty. If you're invited to the king's banquet and you have a place of prominence and you don't show up, everybody's going to know something is going on. Everybody's going to know you're not there. Ever been in one of those situations where everybody knew if you weren't there? It's kind of like if you were the guest of honor at a party and you didn't show up for the party. You know, it's not like you were one of 50 people invited and you weren't able to be there. 1 or 2 people may notice that you weren't there. But in this case, everybody's going to notice David isn't there. And Saul, on the first night, he starts to make reason in his mind. Okay, he's unclean for some reason. Something has happened to keep David away from celebrating at this feast. And we can go back to the Levitical priesthood under the letters there in the book of Leviticus and read about the litany of things that would make you unclean. And you had to go through the purification, and depending on what it was, there was different lengths of time that you were considered unclean and you were to stay away from other people. And Saul is just thinking, okay, something has happened here, and he's not able to attend. But he doesn't ask. Kind of just keeps it to himself. Lets the feast, lets the banquet happen, and he goes on. And then day 2 comes, and David doesn't show up again. And now we see Saul's response. He begins to ask, why is David doing this? Remember, the people are going to realize that once again, David is staying away. I don't think that Saul is going out and advertising that I'm trying to kill David. He wants everyone to think that everything between he and David are great. He's putting on a show. He wants everyone to, think that he is a great king and he has these great leaders and everything in his administration is going wonderful. People are going to start talking. People are going to start questioning. Why is one of his commanders not at this feast? What is going on? What's the problem here? It would be the same way, when things are out of the ordinary, we notice it. We begin to ask questions. We begin to talk to other people. Well, what did you hear? Well, what do you know? Yeah, we still do it. 3,000 years after this story happened, we do the same thing, And we start to hear the rumors. We start to hear the stories. We start to piece together, well, something's going on. And Saul begins to ask, why is the son of Jesse not here? It's interesting here. He doesn't even call him by his name. He just points out, he's the son of Jesse. Why is he not here? Probably giving an indication in the way he asked the question of, he's a servant of mine. I have commanded him to be here, and he's not here. Who is this shepherd boy? Who is this lowly kid from Bethlehem that he would not come to a banquet when ordered here by the king? You kind of see what Saul is doing is he's placing himself in the way he asked this question is, I'm up here, he's down here, and he's defying me. Why is that? You see even the arrogance of Saul come out in the way he asked the question. And it's also a way to kind of dehumanize him. By not calling him by a name, it dehumanizes him. It belittles him. It makes him look bad in front of the others who are sitting at the table. But you see Jonathan's response. When Jonathan immediately responds, David calls him by a name. He humanizes him again. He elevates him back up to the position that he deserves. Not higher than he deserved. He doesn't try to glorify him. He doesn't try to give him any accolades. He just humanizes him again and says, David asked me to go to Bethlehem. He asked me to go back and be with his family. There is a sacrifice that's being held in his city. And his brother, this may be an indication that David's father has died at this point. Because he said it was his brother has commanded him to come back. So his brother may be leading the family now, and his father may have died at this point. Because he refers to his brother and not my father has asked me to come back to the city of Bethlehem for this sacrifice. We're not told for sure, but it may be an indication in the way that the brother is leading or commanding David to come back for the sacrifice now. So Jonathan says he went back to be with his family. There was a family event that happened. We have to make a choice between going back to be with our family, go to be a guest of honor at a banquet with the king. I don't know which one we would choose. Depends on your family sometimes, but here, this is the reason. And this is the story that Jonathan and David have come up with. And Jonathan's about to get his answer. And immediately, We don't get any indication that Saul asked any more questions. He's probably already irritated. He's probably already, we might say, kind of fuming on the inside. Fuming with anger on the inside. The fact that David hasn't been there for 2 days in a row. He realizes the people are going to be looking at him going, why is this place empty? Why is David staying away? It's going to make Saul look bad in Saul's eyes. So now I'm going to turn it from David to Jonathan.
I wanted to ask, when he was deepest in his heart to kill David, and he doesn't use him by name at the table, if someone sloughs off someone of importance like a king, and he's speaking of him, dehumanizing him, as you said, would that not be part of his thought process to where when something does happen to David, it's because he didn't honor the king?
He probably, no. I'm sure that's part of Saul's mindset, is you're taking away my glory, you're taking away my honor. This is just another reason why you need to be put to death, is you are, disobeying my wishes to be here. All of it in Saul's mind, he is reasoning this is why David needs to be put to death. So then we get Saul's response. He immediately turns it on his own son. Remember, Saul has other children. Saul has other sons. We read about them. I don't know if we're ever told exactly how many sons Saul has, but we know he has other sons. Some of them die in battle at the same time Saul dies in battle. One takes the throne and reigns for 7 years as there was a civil war between Judah and Israel. And Jonathan is the only one chosen to sit at the table. So Jonathan, of all of Saul's sons, has this prominence with his father. And remember, Jonathan was, in his mind, was privy to everything his father was going to do. He seems to be probably the oldest of Saul's children, and the fact that he has this position. Certainly the most trusted of Saul's children. And his anger is immediately turned to Jonathan. We see how angry and rash of a human being Saul has become. He calls him a son of a perverse and rebellious woman. And he goes through this kind of this tirade with Jonathan here. In this outrage, what he really does is he calls into question the legitimacy of Jonathan's birth. Okay? I'm going to be kind of blunt here with you. If you go back to the original Hebrew, what he calls him in the original Hebrew is, you are a bastard child who was born to a whore. Imagine telling one of your children that. But that's what we see Saul do to his son. He is so angry that Jonathan would tell David, you don't have to be here, but I'm going to call you this name. We've all been irritated at our kids. We've all wanted to strangle one of our kids, or all of our kids, at one time or another. Shake your head like this, because we've all been there. I hope none of us have ever gotten to this point with our kids. This is how rash or how arrogant Saul has become. I had this plan to kill David, and now you've ruined it for me, so I'm going to lash out at you in this way. In these verses, he tells him, you've chosen David over me. You're a traitor. Not only am I going to question the legitimacy of your birth and whether you should even inherit the throne after me, because that was the way kingdoms usually passed, you're a traitor to me. The fact that you have become friends with David means that you have chosen him over me. And you're a traitor. And he calls him a foolish person for the way that he is conducting himself. And if you look in verse 31, it says, Saul tells him, "For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, you shall not be established, nor your kingdom." This may be an indication that Saul knew David had been anointed the next king of Israel. He realizes as long as David lives, my son Jonathan's not going to be anointed king. In some ways, he's trying to tell Jonathan, I want to kill David so you can be king. I'm doing this for you, Jonathan. You ever heard that argument? I'm doing something rash, I'm doing something illegal, I'm doing something unethical, immoral. Well, I'm doing it for you. I want to justify this in my mind. I'm doing the wrong thing, but I'm doing it for the right reason. I get that kind of impression that this is what Saul's trying to tell Jonathan. And not telling him in a nice, calm way either. So, Jonathan begins to question his father's judgment. What wrong has he done? Tell me. Explain yourself. Now, remember the situation here. They're at a feast. They're at a banquet. All kinds of other people are around. Abner's sitting right here. Jonathan's directly across from his father. They're probably glaring at each other. Saul's losing his temper. Everybody else in the room can see Saul's losing his temper. Everybody's probably stopped eating at this point. What's going on?
How did he do the spear?
Well, we're not to that point yet,
Are you talking before?
because we hadn't thrown the spear yet. Saul's just yelling at Jonathan.
Okay.
Everybody's probably watching by this point. And Jonathan asked him a question. What did David do? Here's your chance to answer. Here's your chance to tell everybody what wrong David did. You know, and it was brought out earlier. Why did the people view David more popular than Saul? Well, here's your chance to answer. Here's your chance to give everybody the answer of what wrong David has done. And then you see Saul's response. Not going to answer the question. Not even going to try to rationalize with you. Not going to try to even explain myself. I'm going to lash out even more. If you remember earlier that Saul seemed to have this spear or this javelin beside him. Remember when David was playing the harp back in chapter 18 for Saul, and Saul decides, I'm going to kill you. Then he has the javelin or a spear beside him. He throws it across the room trying to hit David then and kill him. Well, here, maybe Saul's weapon of choice was this spear or javelin, and I got it everywhere I go with me. Because again, he has it right there by him. And he picks it up and he throws it at his son. I don't know how big this table is. I would think trying to pick a spear up and throw it at somebody who's, a couple feet away from you would be a difficult task. There might have been a different weapon of choice that might have worked better in this case. But Jonathan, he misses. I don't know if Jonathan ducked, Jonathan moved, Saul's a bad aim. I don't know. But he misses. And again, Teresa's point, this spear had to go somewhere. They're in a room full of people. Everybody's going to see this javelin throwing at my son. I've just been yelling, screaming, insulting him in front of everybody. And now I try to kill my son in front of everybody. So how do all these people in this room now view Saul? What kind of impression has he made? So we see Saul's response. And in these verses we talked a little bit about, we see Jonathan's devotion to David. He questions his father. Not only is he questioning his father, he's questioning the king in front of everybody. Something that you probably just didn't do. You know, even the counselors of the king would pull them aside into a small, room or away from everybody else to, give advice or to question the king's judgment. Jonathan's doing this in front of everybody. I'm going to question your judgment. Not only are you my father, you're my king, and I'm going to make you look bad in front of everyone. We see that the friendship and devotion to David was more important than Jonathan being the next king. Saul has told him, as long as David lives, you're not going to be anointed the next king over Israel. Saul knew that. Turn to Proverbs 17:17. And this kind of just describes the relationship that Jonathan and David have. As Solomon would write, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. And then in chapter 18, verse 24, a man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Solomon here is writing about the value of friendship and the value of these close friends that you can always depend on no matter what. And I hope that all of us have one of those people in our life that no matter what is going on, no matter what has happened, no matter what time of the day or night it is, if you need them, they're there. And they don't judge you, they don't criticize you, they may ask you what you were thinking. Sometimes that's a good thing for them to do, but they're not doing it to be mean or to belittle you. And you can depend on that friendship no matter what. And I think this is what we see here between Jonathan and David. That no matter what was going on, they had that bond. That even Jonathan was willing to give up being king to maintain that friendship with David. And that's something that, we probably really can't grasp how much that would mean. Imagine, you have the chance to rule a nation. And how many people would, want that prestige and that honor to say that they were the king or they were the queen? And Jonathan here is like, the friendship of David is more important to me than sitting on a throne. So Jonathan leaves the banquet, as we talked about a little bit, and he goes out and he finds David in the field. And this is the story, we didn't read about it, but this is where Jonathan takes his bow and arrow and the young boy with him, and he fires the arrows out into the field. And the signal to tell David what had happened at the feast was, if I shoot the arrows beyond where the boy is standing, and I tell him to go further out to get the arrows, then my father is trying to kill you. But if I tell the boy, come back toward me, because the arrows are closer to me, then that would be the sign that, David, you were wrong. My father's not trying to kill you. So in this story, Jonathan fires the arrows. He tells the boy, go out. They're further beyond. David hears what Jonathan yells at him. He gets his answer. Absolutely, Saul is trying to kill me. Jonathan sends the boy and the bow and arrows back into the city. David comes out, and we have this reunion in verses 41 and 42. And we see David and Jonathan weep on each other's shoulders. Jonathan has his answer. My father most certainly wants to kill David. He is so angry at David. He's so enraged with jealousy that he's even willing to kill me. And in verse 42, they renew their vow to one another that they will protect each other's descendants. And I'm not going to get this right. Mephibosheth, maybe? This is Jonathan's son. This is the only surviving member of the house of Saul. After the 7 years of civil war between the house of Saul and the house of David that divides the country, David begins to gain strength. Eventually he wins, and the house of Saul is basically put to death, except for this one son of Jonathan. In 2 Samuel 4, verse 4, it tells us that this guy is he becomes crippled. His nurse is carrying him, actually. She's fleeing with him to hide him, and she falls, or she drops him. He becomes crippled because of his nurse dropping him. Probably broke a leg or broke an ankle, never healed correctly. And he walks with a limp for the rest of his life. And then in 2 Samuel 9 is the story of David seeks out any surviving relatives from the house of Saul. The son of Jonathan is told to David that he still lives. David brings him into his house. He restores all of Saul's lands to him. And it says that for the rest of his life he ate at the king's table. So he basically lives in the house of David for the rest of his life and is taken care of. David continues to honor this vow that he makes to Jonathan. So really we see the friendship of Jonathan in this story. We see the commitment that David has in this story to honor his vow. This is many years later that this story in 2 Samuel happens. Probably 20 years, maybe more, 30 years after the events here in 1 Samuel chapter 20 happen is when 2 Samuel chapter 9 happens. And we see David continuing to honor his friendship. We never read again after 2 Samuel or 1 Samuel 20 of David ever seeing Jonathan again. This is the last time we read of these two seeing each other. What thoughts, what comments do you have? We're coming up on our time. No one? Anyone? All right. We want to turn to the questions in our book. Page 44, we'll go through them real quick, and we'll close for the morning. So who joined King Saul at the Feast of the New Moon? And? Jonathan. Abner and Jonathan. Why did Saul think David was absent on the first day?
Thought he was unclean.
Thought he had done something to make himself unclean. And where did Jonathan say David had gone when Saul asked? Gone back to Bethlehem to sacrifice, to be with his family. His older brother had called him back. What did Jonathan say, or what did Saul say Jonathan would not be as long as David lived? Your kingdom will not be established. You will never be king as long as this boy lives. What did Saul attempt to do to Jonathan? Kill him. You know, I have threatened to kill one of my kids. I've threatened to skin one of my kids alive. You know, never actually thrown a spear at one of them. Doesn't mean I won't try. Better watch it, bud. How did Jonathan warn David to flee from Saul?
Shooting the arrow beyond the boy.
Yep. This is where he shoots the arrows beyond the boy, tells the boy to go out further to find the arrows. That's the signal to David that Saul was indeed trying to kill him. And what did Jonathan remind David of before the two of them departed?
Their path.
Yep.
Covenant.
The covenant, or the promise they made to each other.
To God, so.
Yes. That they would protect each other's family, and may the Lord be between your family and my family. That bond, and no matter what happens, one of us will take care of the other's family. Any thoughts, any comments on this? So, next week we're going to get into David and Saul some more, and we'll read about really more of the character of David versus the character of Saul. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.